Did he know absolutely categorically that there was a line of demarcation that Deshaun Watson said, knew at that moment that he was not going to cross? Did he know that? I don't think he knew that when he took the job. And that's why I think you're right. I question sincerely whether if Nick Caserio knew everything about this situation, whether he would have taken this job.
Well, but he knew Easterby. And I think that's the key. And I've realized over the course of the past several months, there are two distinct camps among folks in the NFL. And I don't know how big each one is, but one camp consists of the people who are charmed by Easterby. And the other camp, and I think there are more in this camp, Peter, consists of the people who think he's a snake oil salesman, a charlatan, a BS artist, an opportunist, a climber, anything but someone who has the chops to get it done. He just wants the money, the title, the power without the ability to actually deserve it and wield it, and he talks a good game, and it's all a bunch of crap. That's the other camp. Two camps. Caserio's clearly in the first camp. Regardless of who else is in that first camp, Cal McNair and Nick Caserio may be the only two members of that club. But Caserio doesn't take that job if he doesn't think Easterby is legitimately qualified, on the up and up, not a snake oil salesman, not a charlatan, not a BS artist. There's no way Caserio takes that job. And if he does take that job and he thinks those things, then it's on him.
I think that Nick Caserio knew Jack Easterby in a different time and place. And I think that especially, with Jack Easterby saying to Nick Caserio, I do not want to be the general manager. I've never wanted to be the general manager. You are going to come in with full general manager authority. Cal McNair says to him, Jack Easterby's not the general manager. I'm never going to make him the general manager. Never going to give him personnel authority. You have personnel authority on this team. You will have the biggest say, the biggest voice in who our head coach is going to be. In fact, when Brandon Staley interviewed for this job on the morning, he interviewed at 8:30 or not 9:30 in the morning Pacific time for this job before he got in his car and went down to talk to the Chargers, at which point later in the day he got the Charger job. But when he was interviewing with Caserio, it was Caserio alone. And it was Caserio. The understanding was this was going to be Caserio's hire. The recommendation, the guy who he wanted, was going to get approved by the ownership of this team. And so, to me, Mike, I think Nick Caserio thought that he was coming into a situation where he was going to have full personnel authority and control, and which I still think is going to happen. And he had no idea at that time that Deshaun Watson had told the owner of this team, I'm not, or told anybody with this team that I am absolutely not coming back.
There were people in New England who had heard and who believed that Easterby had aspirations to be a general manager at some point. Remember when Bill Belichick did the press conference in advance of the New England game against Houston during football season after the Easterby stuff first was kicked up? Belichick had that quote about Easterby, he's not a personnel person. No. My understanding is that part of that came from this vibe that was prevailing in New England, that Easterby had these unrealistic aspirations to go from chaplain with the Chiefs, unpaid, a decade ago or less than that, into actually being a general manager of a team someday, that there were people in New England who knew it. Apparently Caserio didn't, or he wasn't troubled by it, wasn't bothered by it, wasn't threatened by the possibility. And speaking of Easterby, he came up yesterday during Culley's press conference. Let's hear Culley explain exactly what it is that Easterby does. Here he is.
I'm the head coach. Jack is he's vice president of football operations, which involves a bunch of things. It involves scheduling. It involves logistics around the building. It involves a bunch of things that go on here that he does a wonderful job of doing. And basically, it's a multitude of responsibilities.
Okay. far as personnel?
General manager is Nick. Nick handles all personnel.
That's what Cully had to say, but a multitude of responsibilities for Jack Easterby, apparently not putting the toothpaste back in the tube after he saw what Cully had to say to Jim Trotter and Steve Weish, but multitude of responsibilities without a whole lot of specifics, but that, kind of meshes with the sense that Easterby's got his hand in a lot of different things, and he's got the blessing of Cal McNair. So, who knows how far it goes, Peter. He continues to be this mysterious figure, even though he's gotten far more notoriety than he ever bargained for. We still don't really know what the guy's doing, but we know he's involved in a lot of things, a multitude of things, as Cully would say.
Yeah, I did a story last August, Mike, on a day in the life of an NFL team at training camp in this weird year. And for that story, I had access to Easterby. I talked to him 3 or 4 times that day. And I also got to witness one of his big duties with the organization. And one of those big duties was at the end of the day, he had a half-hour session where all the department heads reviewed what happened that day, what the issues were there any COVID-related problems, were there any testing problems, anything like that, and then looking forward to the next day with, who had this job, who had that job. And Bill O'Brien sat in the audience for that meeting. There was no question that Jack Easterby was sort of setting the daily schedule, which I'm sure because after this meeting, he met with Bill O'Brien to talk about those kind of things one-on-one. So I'm sure it was at O'Brien's, it was in O'Brien's purview to say, Jack, this is your job. I need to now go coach the football team. You handle all of these details. And in training camp during the time of COVID, there were 1,000 details every day. And so that is, to me, in the time of COVID, the vice president of football operations has a lot to do. And Mike, I would disagree with you on this. I don't think there's any evidence inside the Texans that Jack Easterby ever said or ever moved to become the general manager of this team. I think you can say a lot of negative things about him, but I don't think it was ever a serious consideration, if indeed he ever did a thing about it, that Cal McNair would have made him the general manager.
He was the interim general manager, Peter. He had the job.
Right, but
he was the guy.
All it was, he was a placeholder. That's all he was. To be a general manager, he was never going to be the general manager of this team.
I think he had aspirations to be. And at the time that this all happened, that's when people, especially in Houston, in the Houston media and the fans, the fans ordinarily don't care about this kind of stuff. It's been amazing to me how the Texans fans have had the alarms go off and the red flags go up with Easterby. I don't think he expected the kind of scrutiny and blowback that he got as he reached closer and closer for that brass ring. And the blowback resulted in guys like Cal McNair saying he's never going to be the general manager of this team. That doesn't mean he didn't have the aspiration. It just means it got smacked down. It got ripped out of his hand because he climbed too fast. And people started to say, who the hell is this guy? And why is he climbing? And that was at the same time, Peter, questions were coming up about his resume and embellishment of his background and overstating of whatever limited experience. And it's extremely limited in football operations. That's when this all kind of came together. So what happened was he was getting closer and closer to pulling it off, and it blew up on him. I firmly believe that.
Yeah, I don't. And I think that his biggest mistake and the team's biggest mistake right now, quite honestly, when Jenny Vrentas and Greg Bishop of Sports Illustrated had that story a few months ago about, how disastrous his past and what was going on inside the team was, for him not to talk publicly for that story and not to refute whatever it was in that story that he felt should have been refuted. It leads you to believe that, to me, the team was setting him up to be the fall guy, or B, that they just made a terrible mistake in not allowing Easterby to defend himself. And I'm assuming that he wanted to defend himself. I don't know that, but I'm assuming. Who would want to have a story written about them that said you're a con artist or whatever? And I'm exaggerating that. But in essence, that was an extremely negative story about Easterby. And not to say that it was a bad story. I think it was a good story. But it was an extremely negative story about Easterby, and he should have spoken up and said something about it. Why do you not defend yourself in an august publication with two excellent journalists like that? I think it was ridiculous.
Well, Peter, maybe it's because you are a con artist and the jig is up. Maybe that's why you got nothing to say, and you just keep your head low and you do everything short of calling the press the enemy of the people. It's that simple. That's kind of what con artists do, and we've witnessed that in other contexts over the past few years, and thank God we're not dealing with that anymore on a broader level, and that's all I'm going to say about that.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.